About a year ago, I worked at a mall phone store because commission kept my lights on and I could do upgrades in my sleep. The setting was glass counters, account screens, and angry people who forgot passwords. The premise was boring on paper. Someone used normal consumer systems to track a stranger. My role was the rep with access to account notes and SIM swaps. My plan was to finish my shift, hit the food court, and not take any special favors from anyone. That day was slow, and I was running on caffeine and habit. Our kiosk sat under bright mall lights, glass counters smeared with fingerprints, and a line of people who treated passwords like personal insults. When he stepped up, he didn't look rushed or angry. He looked prepared. He slid a printed ID across the counter. Not a beat-up card, just a clean laminate. He asked for a SIM replacement because his phone got stolen. He had the right name and the right last four. The security questions came out fast, like he'd practiced in the car. My brain did what it always did. Check boxes, hit next, move on. I told myself I was being careful. I wasn't. I was being efficient. I typed the notes, popped a fresh SIM, and watched the system flip his service live in 2 minutes. He thanked me, pocketed it, and walked off into the mall like he was picking up socks. 2 days later, she came in. She was shaking so hard the phone rattled in her hand. She said her number went dead. Then her bank text stopped. Then her email got hit with password resets, and everything started sliding. I pulled up the account to calm her down and saw my employee ID on a SIM swap. Same timestamp, same store. My fucking stomach dropped. I called my manager. He didn't come out right away. He stayed in the back until I said the words SIM swap, loud enough to scare him. He walked up, took one look at her, and tried to turn it into a script. We'll just verify and fix it. I told him it wasn't fix it, simple. He told me to calm down and follow process like I was the one causing the mess. I reissued the SIM to her with her real ID, got her number back on the network, and it still didn't feel like a win. Her number was already used as a key. Whoever had it grabbed the two-factor codes, got into email, then hit banking, then anything tied to that email. You don't need a gun for that. You need 10 minutes and a clerk who's tired. I pulled the camera footage because I wanted one solid thing to hand the cops. The camera above our counter was down for maintenance. Of course it was. I asked my manager why it was always down. He shrugged and said it wasn't our problem. The mall hallway camera was the only thing that caught anything. The guy's back, hood up, head down, moving like he'd done it 100 times. I filed an internal incident report. Corporate kicked back a response that read like blame without saying blame. Possible customer error. My manager acted relieved, like the words erased the fact that my login did the swap. I argued with him in the back room. I said, someone walked in here and stole her life through my terminal. He said I was being dramatic and hurting numbers. He actually said numbers while she sat 10 feet away, trying not to cry. She went to the police. They asked her if she had an ex. That was their whole brain. They kept circling back to boyfriend drama because it fit their mental template. She told them no. They told her to change her passwords and her number like she hadn't already been sprinting in place. Then the stalking turned into paperwork attacks. She started getting packages at her apartment. Not threats, gifts, a cheap necklace, a stuffed animal, then a printed photo of her walking from the train. She showed it to me at my counter, hands trembling, and I felt my face go hot with shame. That photo meant he wasn't just stealing accounts. He was watching her. After that, it was a drip feed of official trouble. A welfare check because someone reported screaming. A call from her landlord about complaints of illegal subletting. A message from HR about an anonymous tip that she was unstable and might be a risk. None of it was one big event. It was a dozen small pushes that made other people pressure her until she cracked. I tried to help and got punished for it. I dug through the account history to map out what happened, what devices got added, what PIN got changed, what notes got left. My manager wrote me up for unauthorized data access because I looked deeper than the script allowed. I told him he was protecting corporate instead of a customer. He told me I could either sign it or lose shifts. I signed it because rent doesn't care about my morals. After that, Every customer felt like a potential con. Every SIM replacement made my pulse jump. I started staring at IDs like they were weapons. I started asking for extra verification and got told I was slowing the line. I stopped feeling proud of being fast. Fast was how I got played. She kept coming back because I was the only face attached to the problem. She didn't yell. That would have been easier. She just looked at me like I'd opened a door and let something in. She said switching providers didn't stop the weird shit. She said new accounts still got hit, like someone already had enough pieces of her life to keep finding the next door. I called the carrier's fraud hotline from the back office. I expected urgency. I got whole music and a woman reading fields off a screen. She asked for store code, account number. What proof do you have the customer is who she says she is? I said, she's standing in front of me. The fraudster isn't. She told me to use neutral language. I wanted to throw the handset through the drywall. We tried to put a fraud note on her account that would force in-person verification. Corporate policy said notes couldn't accuse. My manager backed policy because policy kept him employed. I snapped at him. I said, he'll keep doing this because we're scared of the word. He hissed, lower your voice. You're scaring customers. As if the customers weren't already living in the same danger, just didn't know it yet. She started tracking her own life like evidence. She printed screenshots of reset emails. She wrote dates and times on a legal pad. She changed her bank password so many times the app locked her out for suspicious activity and made her call a number that put her on another hold line. She changed her email, and the new email got a password reset request within a day. She said, how? Like the word could plug the hole. The gifts kept coming. One box had a keychain with her first name engraved, cheap metal, spelled right. Another had a prepaid phone still in plastic. That one made my skin crawl because it wasn't romantic. It was practical. It felt like he was offering her a tool while proving he controlled her real number. The welfare check was the first time she cried at my counter. She said the cops looked her up and down like she was a liar. Her neighbor watched from behind a half-open door. The next morning, her landlord left a note about disturbances and lease violations. She tried to explain, and he told her to handle her personal issues. Personal, like her identity getting peeled apart, was a personality flaw. At work, HR put her on leave while they assessed risk. Not fired, just suspended in midair with bills still due. She told me her manager stopped replying to her emails. She told me friends stopped answering texts because they didn't want drama. The stalker didn't have to threaten her. He just made her look unstable to everyone else, one report at a time. I went back to corporate again, begging for a hard lock, a requirement that any SIM swap must happen only in-store with additional ID checks. They sent me a training link about social engineering awareness. A fucking training link. My manager pulled me into the office and said I needed to stop obsessing. He said, you did your job. I said, my job broke her. He told me to take a walk. I told him to go to hell. He threatened to cut my shifts. We stood there in a cramped office smelling like stale fast food, both of us angry for different reasons. Me because someone was getting destroyed, him because the destruction was inconvenient. After that, I started checking my own accounts like a paranoid idiot. I set pins. I turned off SMS codes where I could. I watched my phone signal like it could warn me before it died. Every time it dropped a bar, my chest tightened. I kept thinking about how the guy walked out with that SIM like it was nothing, and how I handed it over with a smile. The last time I saw her, she came in to cancel her line and move providers like that would cut the cord. She looked at me like I'd sold her a dress off a shelf. I wanted to say I was sorry. I wanted to say I was tricked. But I watched the damage ripple out from my login like oil and water, and sorry felt like a joke. When I was training at a 911 center, I worked the overnight desk because new hires get the worst hours and the city never sleeps. The setting was headsets, CAD screens, and supervisors who treat callers like annoying background noise. The premise was a missing person case that looked small until it didn't. My role was the trainee who typed notes while someone else made decisions. My plan was to follow script, log clean, and not get screamed at by my floor lead. Overnights in that room felt like being trapped in a machine. The fluorescent lights made everyone look sick. The coffee tasted burnt. The jokes were mean. My lead lived for procedure. He'd walk behind us, read our notes, and correct our tone like we were customer service. If a caller sounded frantic, he'd say they were performing. If a caller sounded calm, he'd say they were lying. He treated every voice like a problem he had to shrink. A call came in from a woman whispering in a bathroom. She said she'd escaped a car and didn't know where she was. She kept repeating a landmark, a tow yard sign, and a row of storage units. She said a man had taken her phone and kept saying he had friends in dispatch. She gave me one detail that stuck: the smell of gasoline and old fries in the car, like the floor mats lived in a fast food bag. She kept stopping to listen, like she could hear someone outside the door. I heard a fan on her end, and under it, metal clanging and a truck idling. She said she ran barefoot over gravel and her feet were bleeding. She said she didn't want to leave tracks. She kept asking if I could see where she was, like the headset came with a miracle. I typed everything. I flagged it urgent. I waved my lead over so hard my arm hurt. My floor lead listened for 10 seconds, rolled his eyes, and downgraded it to suspicious person because the caller sounded high to him. He told me to stop being dramatic and follow protocol. I wanted to punch him. I didn't. I watched the call drop when she started crying too loud. The second it dropped, he said, "There you go," like it was proof she was messing with us. I tried calling back. No answer. I told him she said she was taken. I told him she said the guy bragged about dispatch. I told him she was whispering like she'd get caught. He cut me off and said if we send units, every time a junkie whispers a story, the city burns. Then he changed the priority again just to make sure it stayed low. I started a location ping request anyway, because we can do that when someone's in danger. He canceled it with one click and said if I did it again, he'd write insubordination in my evaluation. I was fucking furious, but I swallowed it because trainees get punished for tone, not for being right. A veteran across the aisle gave me a look that said, "Don't die on this hill." That look pissed me off more than my lead's voice. When the queue thinned, I searched the map myself. Tow yard plus storage units narrowed it down fast. There were only 2 tow yards near those storage units. I noted both, added them to the log, and tagged the nearest patrol sector so at least someone could drive by. My lead leaned over, saw my notes, and deleted 1 tow yard because we don't guess. That was his excuse for doing nothing. He also deleted the part where I wrote friends in dispatch, calling it caller paranoia. I told him that line mattered because if it was true, the call wasn't just a missing person, it was a system problem. He leaned in so close I could smell his stale coffee breath and told me, quiet, that he could wash me out of training with 1 write-up. Then he smiled like he enjoyed it. He said, I was here to learn how the job really works, not how I wished it worked. After that, every time I typed, I felt his shadow behind my shoulder. Hours later, another call came in, same voice, weaker, saying she was hiding under a trailer. She begged me not to transfer her because she heard police scanners in the background and thought someone would know. She said she could see boots walking past, back and forth, like someone was searching. She said the ground was wet and cold, and she'd pressed her face in a mud to stay silent. She said she crawled under the trailer and scraped her stomach on something sharp, and she was holding her breath until her ears rang. She kept whispering, "Please don't put me on hold," like hold music would get her killed. I flagged it again and started the location request, ready to eat the consequences. My lead snatched the call from me, canceled the request, and told me I was going to learn to follow the chain. He put her on hold the second another call queued, then hung up. Just ended it. No transfer. No note about the hold. I watched him clean up the screen like he was wiping fingerprints, changing little fields so the timeline looked tidy. He told me I didn't see anything, and if I said I did, I was calling him a liar. I snapped and told him he was going to get her killed. He didn't raise his voice. He told me he'd been here 15 years and nothing sticks to him. He told me to remember who signs my training packet. Then he wrote my trainee evaluation while I watched, slow and deliberate, poor emotional regulation, and difficulty accepting coaching like my problem was caring. The rest of the shift, I took calls with my stomach clenched, waiting for her voice to come back, waiting for any unit to radio in about a tow yard or storage units. Nothing came. In the morning, a bulletin went out. Missing woman, last seen near the exact area I typed. My stomach flipped. I recognized her from the photo like I'd known her, just from the voice. It wasn't a vague match. The age, the hair, the clothes, all lined up with what she'd whispered. The flyer mentioned storage units. It mentioned a tow yard corridor. I printed the call logs because my brain kept screaming that paper is harder to erase. The printer spit out warm pages, and my lead appeared like he'd been waiting. The second he saw the pages, his face changed. No smirk, just tight anger. He grabbed them and threatened to have me terminated for unauthorized printing. He told me he'd ruin my career if I played hero. He said he'd make sure no center in the county hired me. When I reached for the paper back, he jerked it away and said, loud enough for the room, that I was out of control, like I was the threat. Then, quieter, he told me to think about how many people in the building had access to my address. I waited until he got pulled into another call, reprinted the logs, and shoved them in my bag. I also took photos of my screen with my phone because I didn't trust anything digital in that room anymore. That night, a private number texted my personal phone, a screenshot of my trainee badge photo. Under it, stay in your lane, no name, no emoji, just a clean warning. That photo wasn't public. It lived inside the building. Someone pulled it from a system like it was nothing and wanted me to understand they could reach into my life whenever they felt like it. I sat on my couch staring at it until my eyes watered. My hand shook so bad I dropped the phone once. I kept thinking about her saying friends in dispatch and realizing she might have been right. I still showed up for my next shift because the place trains you to swallow fear and keep working. I went to internal affairs anyway with the logs on a thumb drive. They thanked me, opened a review, and told me to keep quiet. They asked if I had personal conflict with my lead. They asked if I was sure the caller wasn't intoxicated. They asked if I understood the stress of the floor. I told them about the edits, the canceled location request, the hang-up, and the badge photo text. I told them I didn't feel safe, and I didn't think the caller was safe either. They nodded, took notes, and said they'd handle it. The way they said it sounded like a lid closing. They kept the thumb drive and told me not to make copies and not to discuss it with anyone, like silence was the solution. 2 weeks later, they reassigned me to a different shift for my safety, like I was the problem. They moved me off nights, off calls, and stuck me on daytime admin work where I couldn't touch CD or see audit logs. People started avoiding me. Conversations stopped when I walked up. My lead kept working. I saw him once in the hallway, and he smiled like we shared a joke. A detective finally called once, weeks later, and asked me to repeat the tow yard and storage unit detail like it was new information. I gave it again, word for word, and he sounded tired, like he was checking a box. After that, nothing. No update, no outcome, just silence and the next call ringing in the headset. I asked internal affairs what they found, and they told me the review was ongoing. I should stop asking. The missing flyer curled on the wall until someone took it down like old trash. They never found her. The lead kept working. The center kept answering calls with the same bored tone. And I kept hearing her whispering, because once you realize how easy it is to lose a person inside procedure, it's hard to believe any of us are safe. Hey everyone, I worked intake at a women's shelter because I needed a job and I thought I could handle chaos if it meant doing something decent. The setting was clipboards, locked doors, and overnight calls from people who sound like they're already halfway gone. The premise was that the scary part wasn't one predator. It was the machine that helped by sorting people into risk levels. My role was the staffer who logged injuries and assigned beds. My plan was to finish my shift, file notes clean, and keep the peace until morning. It wasn't some movie version shelter. It was fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick, a buzzer door that stuck, and a constant low hum of panic you could feel in your teeth. People came in shaking, whispering, trying to hold their story together long enough for me to check boxes that decided whether they slept inside or outside. Intake is supposed to be a buffer. Half the time it felt like a dam with cracks. Then we got a new supervisor. He didn't show up like a helper. He showed up like a guy hired to stop problems from being expensive. He started saying efficiency every other sentence. He hated messy clients. Anyone who cried too long, anyone who asked for police, anyone who didn't act grateful enough for whatever scraps we had. He'd call them manipulative. He'd call them liars. He'd call them disruptive like it was a diagnosis. And once a file had that word, the system treated them like trash you could roll to the curb. Transfers happened fast. Bed offers shrank. Alternate placement got suggested like it was a kindness. At first, I told myself I was being sensitive. Nonprofits attract control freaks. That's not news. But I started seeing a pattern that didn't feel like incompetence. Women came in with bruises and busted lips, and I logged it like policy said. Injury notes, photos with consent, referrals offered, safety plan flagged. Then the next morning, the bruise notes were gone or softened into useless mush. Minor injury. Client declined. No visible marks. I'd open the file and feel my stomach drop because I knew what I typed. I knew what I uploaded. The record didn't match reality anymore. There were nights the hallway camera malfunctioned. Always the same hallway, the one that mattered because it connected dorms to the staff office and the back exit. People complained about being followed, about someone hovering near the bathroom, about a man in the vestibule even though visitors weren't supposed to be back there. A complaint would get written, then vanish. A grievance form would go missing. Somebody would get labeled paranoid or seeking attention. The supervisor never touched anyone on camera. He didn't have to. He just nudged the board. He moved people like pieces until they snapped, and then he pointed at the snap as proof they were the problem. I pushed back the only way I could without getting dragged into a shouting match. Tight documentation. Times. Exakt Gording. Policy language. I checked the audit trail when I had a second. The system logged edits if you knew where to look. Who changed what, when, under which login. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I started feeling like I was doing intake and internal affairs at the same time, while being told to smile and be trauma-informed. The hypocrisy made me want to spit. Then one night this woman came in late, hood up, shoulders tucked, eyes scanning like she expected someone to step out from behind the vending machine. She talked fast, like her mouth was trying to outrun her fear. She kept one shoulder turned away. I asked the usual questions, and she kept saying she was fine in this sharp, clipped way that didn't match her shaking hands. I took her into the private room. The door didn't latch right. The light buzzed. I asked if she needed medical attention, and she finally showed me her shoulder. Bite marks. Fresh. Angry. Not a love bite. Not a bruise from a fall. Teeth. Broken skin points and swelling. She didn't dramatize it. She begged me not to send her back outside. She said she didn't care where she slept. She'd take a chair. She'd take the floor. Just don't make her leave. I did the job. I logged it. I took photos with consent. I uploaded them to the secure drive. I flagged her file urgent. I marked safety concern. I wrote down the bite marks exactly, because details matter when someone later tries to pretend nothing happened. The supervisor came in like he could smell a situation. He didn't look at her. He looked at the screen. He scrolled and frowned like the file offended him. Then he started in on a drug test. She refused. She wasn't required to take one for emergency intake, not the way he framed it, but he acted like it was some sacred rule and she was spitting on it. He clicked a few things, and suddenly her status flipped to non-compliant. He tagged her disruptive, like a switch, like the bruises and bite marks were irrelevant compared to her not obeying him. I argued. I didn't do it politely because it wasn't a polite moment. I told him the policy. I told him the injury documentation mattered. I told him he couldn't rewrite eligibility because he was pissed she said no. He smiled like he'd been waiting for me to step out of line. He told me I'd learn. Then he wrote me up for unprofessional tone and escalating the client, as if the client wasn't already living inside a fucking nightmare. After that, my schedule got cut. Not all at once, just enough to squeeze. Shifts disappeared. Hours got reassigned. I got pushed off the heavy intake nights where things happened and paper trails formed. When I asked, I got budget excuses and staffing needs and vague bullshit. Then HR opened an investigation into me because a resident claimed I threatened her. Threatened. That exact word. The resident was someone a supervisor had already labeled disruptive after she complained about being followed. It was the neatest little trick. Mark a woman as unreliable, then use her report as a weapon against the staff member who won't shut up. A perfect loop. The HR meeting felt like being processed. They didn't ask about the missing notes. They asked if I had trouble with authority. They asked if I was too emotionally involved. They asked if I understood chain of command. I kept trying to drag it back to facts, edits, deleted attachments, camera malfunctions, that bite mark file getting flipped. They nodded like people nod when they're already done with you. So I started saving copies. Screenshots of the audit trail, timestamps, policy pages, emails, anything I could grab without someone noticing. I sent them to my personal email because I didn't trust the shelter system anymore. I felt stupid doing it, like I was turning into one of those paranoid people everyone laughs at, but the paranoia came from watching reality get erased. The next day, my login stopped working. Just dead. Password rejected. Two-factor didn't ping. IT told me my account expired. Expired like I was a coupon. They told me to contact HR. HR told me to come in for an interview and bring my badge. I walked in and the building felt colder. Same walls, same posters, same locked doors, but now I understood the locks weren't just to keep abusers out. They were to keep mess contained. They sat me in a clean little room and said, "Not a good fit." They said professionalism concerns. They said multiple reports. I asked for specifics. Confidential. I asked if they reviewed the audit trail. They said mistakes happen. I told them I had copies. I told them firing me after I raised concerns looked like retaliation. HR's face tightened and she warned me to be careful with allegations. Like the threat was me, not the shit happening under their roof. They didn't fire him. They fired me. They called it not a good fit. The supervisor kept running intake like a bouncer with a spreadsheet. I tried to report it anyway. Sent what I had to oversight emails, licensing contacts, anyone who looked official enough to give a damn. I got auto replies and silence. The world loves the idea of a shelter. The world doesn't love a shelter that comes with receipts. 2 months later, I ran into that woman at a grocery store. Same one. Not hard to recognize once you've seen someone begging not to be put back outside. She had a limp and a scar on her cheek that didn't look accidental. She stared at a shelf like her brain was somewhere else. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes went flat. Not angry, not relieved, just empty, like I was part of the building, like I was one more locked door that didn't open when she needed it. She didn't say anything. She just rolled her cart away slow, like she'd trained herself not to make noise. I didn't get a jump scare. I got the slow horror of watching a system swallow proof and spit out the person who tried to keep it honest. Every weekend, I ran foreclosure cleanouts with a buddy because the pay was cash and I didn't ask where the owners went. The setting was empty houses, trash bags, and that dead smell of damp carpet. The premise was supposed to be simple. Haul junk, photograph left behind valuables, get out. My role was the guy who opened closets and crawled attics. My plan was to clear one address fast, dump the load, and be home before my girlfriend got mad. The job sheet said bank-owned, vacant, access via lockbox. No names, no history, just a code and a time window like the place was a storage unit. My buddy acted like he loved these runs. He talked big about cash, about finding jewelry in drawers, like we were pirates instead of two idiots hauling other people's lives into contractor bags. I kept telling him to stop dreaming and start moving because the faster we were in and out, the less time we spent breathing whatever the hell lived in those carpets. The house looked normal from the street. Inside, the air hit like sour laundry. Not smoke, not trash, just that wet, old human smell that clings to fabric when nobody opens windows for months. We moved room to room, bagging clothes, stacking dishes, ripping out broken blinds. The living room had pale squares on the wall where pictures used to hang, and the floor had grooves where a couch had sat, like the house remembered weight. Kitchen cabinets were half empty, but the sink had 2 cups and a fork, like somebody stood there and quit mid-morning. My buddy kept pushing the pace, snapping at me to stop looking around and start filling bags. I snapped back that I was the one who had to open closets and check for squatters and needles, so he could chill. He called me paranoid. I called him a cheap bastard who'd sell his own mother for a payout. It was a stupid argument, but it had teeth because we both needed the money and we both hated that we needed it. In the hallway closet, I found a shoebox taped shut. I cut it open expecting paperwork. It was photos, not family photos. Photos of me at a gas station, me carrying a trash bag to my building, me sitting in my car with my head down, phone lit on my face. Different angles, different days. Someone had printed them, labeled them with dates and little times, and slid them into plastic sleeves like baseball cards. Some sleeves had fingerprints on the edges, smudged into the gloss, like the person handled them a lot. My stomach flipped so hard I thought I might puke on the carpet. I stared at one shot too long. Me at my building entrance, key in the lock, captured from inside the lobby through the glass. That angle wasn't random. Whoever took it stood where a neighbor would stand, where I've stood 100 times. My hand started shaking, and the sleeves made this dry little rattle, plastic on plastic, like the box was breathing. I looked for some dumb explanation. Wrong house, wrong box, some weird art project, then saw the dates line up with actual days I remembered. The Friday it rained, the morning my girlfriend left early, the night I sat in my car because I didn't want to go upstairs and fight. Under the photos sat a hand-drawn map of my apartment layout. My couch, my bedroom door, the spot where I keep my spare key. There was a note in block letters, stays inside, watches outside. The ink looked fresh, like it hadn't sat in a closet for years. No name, no explanation, just instructions like I was property. The map had little details I never talk about. The hallway kink by the bathroom, the chair I toss my jacket over, the corner where the floorboard creaks if you step wrong. It wasn't a guess. It was drawn by someone who'd stood in my place long enough to learn it. I felt cold behind my eyes, like my body was trying to shut down to save itself. I walked out holding the box tight to my chest and told my buddy we were leaving. He laughed because he thought I found porn or some old stash of cash until he saw my face. He took one photo from my hand, stared, then looked at me like he was waiting for a punchline. When he flipped it and saw the date, his smile died. For a second, he went quiet in a way that actually scared me more than his jokes, because he looked like he was doing math. Then he tried to slide back into bullshit, saying maybe the old owner was just a freak, saying it didn't mean someone was after me, saying we should finish since we were already here. I told him I didn't give a fuck what he called it. I wasn't staying in a house that had a scrapbook of my life in the closet. He got mad, said I was bailing on the job, said rent doesn't stop because I got spooked. That part hit because it was true, and I hated that it was true. We loaded the truck anyway because rent doesn't care about fear. I hated myself for that. I hated that my first move wasn't the cops, it was the next trash bag. We worked faster, meaner, like the argument turned into fuel. I kept the shoebox wedged behind the passenger seat where I could touch it if I needed to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. Every time I walked past a window, I checked the reflection first, half expecting to see someone behind me. The house stayed quiet. No footsteps, no doors, just that damp stink and our breathing and the sound of bags tearing when something sharp was inside. On the way out, a car idled across the street, engine running, windows up. I stared at it, and the driver lifted a phone like he was recording me recording him. I lifted mine too, not because I'm brave, but because I wanted proof that I wasn't the only one collecting evidence. It wasn't dramatic. It was casual, like he'd done 100 times, and I was just today's assignment. My buddy muttered that I should ignore it, but his voice went thin. I stood there with my keys biting into my palm and stared back until my eyes watered. The car didn't move. The phone didn't lower. In the truck, my buddy started talking again, too loud, trying to turn it into a joke, but the jokes came out clipped, forced. I called the company dispatcher and said the house had personal evidence, something criminal. I expected questions. I expected at least fake concern. She got sharp and told me cleanouts aren't my business. She told me I signed an NDA. She said it like I'd agreed to it in a courtroom, not scribble my name on a greasy clipboard in a parking lot. She told me if I kept making trouble, I'd get blacklisted from every contractor in the county. I said there were photos of me and a map of my apartment. She paused, just a beat, then said I was not allowed to remove items from the property and I needed to finish the work order. I told her I wasn't finishing shit. She said my full name like she'd been looking at it on a screen the whole time. My throat went dry. I asked how she knew it. She didn't answer. She just repeated NDA, blacklist, done. By the time we dumped the load, my skin felt too tight, like I was wearing my own body wrong. I drove home and kept checking mirrors, then felt stupid because even if I saw someone following me, what the hell was I going to do? Call the same people who already told me to shut up. My girlfriend met me at the door mad about the time, mad about the smell on my clothes, mad that this side work was bleeding into our life. I tried to explain without saying the insane part, and she got louder because half explanations sound like lies. We fought. It wasn't cute. It was ugly, sharp, the kind of fight where you feel your own voice go mean and you hate yourself for it. I went to hang my jacket and caught myself checking our closet first, like I was back at the job site. That night, my work phone pinged with a new job assignment. Same address, same house, same time window. The note line said, "Return visit required," like it was a correction, like I'd failed a test, like someone wanted me to come back alone. I stared at the screen until my eyes stung. My buddy texted that it was easy money and asked if we were going. I didn't answer. I shut the phone off. I didn't go back. I quit. 2 weeks later, a new clean-out crew posted a TikTok from that house, joking about weird stalker shit. You could see the hallway behind them for a second, and it made my stomach drop because it looked exactly the same, like the place hadn't moved on at all. The video lasted an hour before it vanished. The house got boarded up. The company told me I'd imagined it and demanded my keys back. They said the address didn't match my service history. Then in the same breath told me to turn in the lockbox key and stop spreading stories. They said it like I was a problem they'd solve, like my fear was just bad customer service. I dropped the keys off and never took another job from them. I still check closets before I hang my own jacket now, because I learned the hard way. You don't have to trespass to find horror. Sometimes the horror already filed paperwork and hired you.